welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. On today's episode, I want to talk about mitigating risk in the Pokemon hobby. And I think this is an important topic that doesn't really get brought up enough, if at all, in this hobby. When people do talk about, the hobby, they talk about different subsections. They'll talk about modern or semi-modern or vintage, and they'll talk about the dangers that modern is. That modern is overly printed. Cards could potentially, be printed into the ground at very low prices in the future. And people will just only ever talk about the extremes. But what we need to do, including this channel, is really we need to get back to focusing and talking about mitigating your risk whenever you go after these different areas of the hobby. And when you talk about mitigating risk, it's not just one thing. It's a lot of different things, especially in the different areas of the hobby. Really, it boils down to just hedging your investments in different areas. You can't just go all in on a single card or a single product. You might get very lucky and that one card or that one product does fantastic in the long run, but you really shouldn't be putting all your eggs in one basket anytime in this hobby. And that just boils down to diversifying, really starting to understand the sets. And this is stuff I've said before and in the past, but really starting to understand different cards and getting out of your comfort zone. It's important to start in your comfort zone, but it's just as important to start getting out of that, because as you get out of your comfort zone, you're going to start to grow in this hobby. And then by growing, you will be able to mitigate that risk a lot more. And then something a lot of people don't really want to hear, but I see happen all the time, is people need to just stop overspending in the hobby. And what do I mean by overspending? I just mean that people are going way too hard on different products, and then they're more or less burning themselves out. Maybe not from the hobby as a whole, but definitely for different sets and definitely for different subsets. It's okay once in a while to just take a step back, view the hobby as a whole and just take a deep breath, because these are warning signs I'm seeing a lot of people do. And that's that overspending and that FOMO and that just, I want to get everything I can. When I talk about mitigating risk, I see photos that people post, and they will post their sealed Pokemon product collection, and it will be a photo of their closet. And in that closet is a booster box of Battle Styles and Chill and Rain and Vivid Voltage and maybe Darkness Ablaze, and then a bunch of V-boxes and some, Eevee tins and a couple Pikachu tins and Shining Fates, and maybe you'll see that one Hidden Fates tin in there, but that's it. It's whoa, this is your sealed product collection? This is dangerous. First of all, it's all crazy super modern stuff. There's zero mitigation of risk in that sealed product collection. And then maybe they'll have one single, Neo Genesis Unlimited light pack, and that's their entire sealed vintage collection. But at the same time, they'll have, a couple $1,000s worth of ultra modern stuff. You'll have an entire case of, Shining Fates ETBs. Just stuff I see that happen, and I see people post, and that's fine if that's what people really love. And if they want to be you boil it down to the true absolute collector. The true collector just wants to collect something because they love it. But I can make the argument that people that have a case of Shining Fates are probably not just true collectors. They're probably hoarding this stuff for some type of return in the future. And if that is the process, and if that's your process at home listening, and that's what you're thinking about doing, you really need to step back a little bit and just start mitigating. Because when you mitigate that risk of all the product you have, if a certain area of this hobby drops on you, and you go from everything being in the black, and then you start being in the red on some of this product, and prices really start to tank hard, if your collection is spread out through different sections of the hobby, you're probably gonna do way better than the people that are just hoarding these closets of super modern stuff, who have just not mitigated risk at all. I do question why people don't mitigate risk a little bit more than they should. And I think a lot of it just happens to do with what they're familiar with. And if they're not super familiar with other sets, they're just super hesitant to tackle that stuff. But like any journey, it always starts with a single step. So if you're able to take that first step and, understand that this hobby, while the time period that the hobby as a whole has been around, you could call it 25 years. It's not a super long amount of time, but within that amount of time, there has been a ton of different Pokemon sets and a ton of different cards printed. But what I feel might happen is people just get a little bit of that tunnel vision, and it's very easy to go after what's hot and what's like the current trending thing in the Pokemon market. And what I see happen often, which is very dangerous, and I've talked about it before, is just people overpaying for product. And that could be the hardest part for some people when it comes to mitigating risk. Because if you are overpaying for product or overpaying for cards or overpaying for anything in this hobby, you're already one step behind everyone else, because you will always be playing the game of catch up. Because at every single point, along your Pokemon collecting career, along your road, you're just going to keep seeing roadblocks, make themselves along that path. Because by buying product, it doesn't matter if it's vintage, semi-vintage, or modern. If you are overpaying, you will have just a tough, long road ahead of you. But what I see happen is a lot of people, they just want it now. It's all about the now for a lot of people. And if you're worried about the now, you're really not mitigating risk. And I think the big argument is well, if I don't get it now, I may never get a chance to get it. And I feel like that is the biggest, incorrect statement you can say in this hobby. There's multiple things. One, you're probably going to get another chance to pick up that product in the future at a lower price. Pokemon right now is definitely printing a lot of stuff. Now, if it's vintage stuff, there's a lot of vintage product that only come on the market very rarely. And in that type of situation, yeah, maybe you will have to jump on a certain product because you might just never see that product appear again. But the amount of products that are that scarce, that have like a rarity factor of, only one or two a year show up on the market, those are definitely outliers. And it is hard to mitigate your risk when it comes to products like those, with the exception of if you do your homework. Because now by doing your homework on those real scarce vintage products, like I said, that do not pop up, all the time, and they just come up very occasionally, by doing your homework, by really understanding the card or the product, you are mitigating your risks, because you have become like, a student of the hobby, and you're studying your purchases. So yes, by, studying, you are mitigating risk in that sense. I come from the school of thought that yes, while there is a luck factor in this hobby, really you control your own destiny in this hobby, and your ability to navigate the hobby will help you out in the long run. But with that said, we'll talk about like the luck factor, because it is very hard to mitigate risk in this hobby when there is that huge luck factor. And no, I'm not just talking about the luck factor that you may or may not pull the chase card of a set when you're opening a pack. What I'm talking about is mitigating risk is when you go after like a promo card that's in some sort of sealed product, or an ETB, or a tin, or whatever. Often with those promo cards, by understanding what is in that set, understanding what that promo card is, understanding if that promo card is valuable, you are already mitigating your risk in a sense. But really, where the luck factor comes into play is just condition of cards. And I hate to say it, but you guys all already know it. You open up a pack of cards, you open up a tin, and the card is just in very poor condition. especially like some of the older promo cards where the cards are like pushed into the cardboard and you just get those like, real hardcore creases in all those cards. Yeah, you know, but that's part of mitigating your risk, is understanding like how promo cards were stored in different products. And then yeah, maybe you could, you know, hopefully pull a good card, but that's where that huge gamble comes into play. And that is very hard to mitigate. But when it comes to condition of cards too, there is also a way to mitigate a little bit against that. And well, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by is when you're going and you're picking up raw cards that are already open and you can actually visually see conditions of the cards, you can mitigate your risk for how that card will grade. And there really is only one way to do that, and that is to become familiar with grading scales. And as you grow in this hobby, as you grade with more companies, you will very quickly learn that different card grading companies have different card grading scales. And if you only have like a handful of graded cards from individual grading card companies, you may or may not be able to really get a good understanding of their grading skills. The only way you're really, really going to be able to mitigate the risk when it comes to condition of cards is to start grading your own cards. And not only just grade them, actually do, a decent pre-screen on your cards. Write down on a list what you think they're going to grade, send them away, and when they get back, look at what you thought that card was going to grade, and then actually see what that card actually received. And if you do that enough, you will get a very good understanding of grading skills for different companies. And like I said, that is just part of you mitigating your risk, because truthfully, and I mean this, if you are going to start going after some high-end raw cards, the difference between like a PSA 9 and a PSA 10 for price on a very high end is astronomical. It is those dollar amounts can really be make or break. So it's so important that you get familiar with those grading scales to really start to mitigate your own risks, especially, like I said, to grow in this hobby and be successful in this hobby. And I cannot stress that enough. And finally, the most important thing you can do in this hobby to mitigate risk is to identify your faults. And I know a lot of people will not want to hear that, but if you can sit back and view this hobby from the outside looking in, but most importantly, look at you from the outside looking in, understand that it is impossible in this hobby for you to know everything. It is impossible for you in this hobby to make the right decision 100% of the time. You can definitely mitigate a lot of risk, but often there's just factors that are in play or involved in this hobby that are out of your control. Like I said, you can be really smart. You can go after like a sealed product of some collection that will be valuable, that has a lot of chase cards, that is undervalued. And like I said, you can just pull all PSA 8s out of that entire pack because it just is what it is. So with that said, if you can start identifying your faults, understanding the areas of the hobby that you need to grow in, that you need to become an expert in, that you need to be smarter about, or understanding that your fault is that you are overspending on certain sections of the hobby. And all this is really hard. It takes a long time. And some of this stuff people may never really be able to shake. But if you're able to identify your faults and you're able to start mitigating the biggest risk factor, going against you in this hobby, which is you. If you're able to start mitigating that risk, you can do very well. And you take everything as something to learn from, something to grow from. Because at the end of the day, you will be successful in this hobby if you grow. If you stop growing, it's going to become much harder for you to continue to perform at a high end in this hobby. But yeah, guys, I just, like I said, I haven't really heard a lot of videos like this being made, just talk about mitigated risk, so I figured, hey, let's make this video. But other than that, catch you guys on the next video.